right, so morning. That's me right there. You can call me whichever way you're more comfortable with. Pick any one name from so many of them, I suppose. Very much comfortable. And so today we're going to be looking at chapters 5 and 6, which is part of your dissertation workshop. It's a section of your dissertation that really requires quite some bit of work. And so we're just going to look at some of the elements that go in there. And so before we proceed, maybe it would be good to know you. I suppose it's a good time to know you. And possibly what we might need to know the most is maybe you say your name, what topic you're working on, in terms of, the rough sketch. You could give us a bit of background in terms of your research as well, and any other information we might need to know. All right, so where do we start? Sorry, let me just close the door over here. Sorry. Do we start from here? Let's start from here.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Nicole. I am doing my research on demotivation of millennials in the workplace, looking particularly at the company that I work for.
Which is, for the sake of industry?
So we're in the manufacturing sector.
Oh, okay. Electronics, you say? All right. Demotivation. Okay. Fair enough. Yes, ma'am?
My name is Teresa Gegana. I work for Holding Treasury. My topic is on the effectiveness of the wellness program where I work.
Oh, okay. I thought you talk about money, treasury. Yeah.
That has been done so many times. So this is one topic that has not been ventured into, and it's a real problem. So I thought,
Okay.
well, if I add, give them some recommendations to that and stop complaining.
Yeah. Are you having some problem in that area, though?
It's a mess.
Wellness.
Yeah. It's a tick box. It's a it's a malicious program.
Okay.
Some of
Interesting.
they didn't even know that there was like a guideline.
Yeah.
So my research made me to even go to the PSA where I found that there were frameworks, and the people who are responsible for it didn't know that things like that.
Yeah.
For status.
Just for status. Okay. Hopefully your research out, they would use it.
Yeah, the HOD actually is very keen on my findings.
Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, sir? My morning.
My name is Robert Kosa. I work for the Department of Home Affairs. My research is on assessing the impact of technology in the provision of Department of Home Affairs services.
All right. Technology and home affairs. All right. Is it a problematic area? Or it's an interesting area to you?
It's an interesting area. I remember we're using papers filling in different forms, but now with all technology.
Yeah. All right. I thought you'd talk about migration of workers and this sort of things as well, I suppose. But yeah, good. The technology, quite some area for sure. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Udo Tafa. My topic is on dealing with cyberbullying in the workplace, using social network, the impact of cyberbullying in the workplace using social network. And then my focus was on where I work. It's a very telecommunications regulator in Botswana.
All right.
We have about 60 officers working in the rural areas.
Okay.
So somewhere, when the time we posted them to rural areas, those who are working with them, the teachers in primary schools, were bullying them. Some were complaining.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see how.
Right. So you're actually based in Botswana?
Yes.
All right. Where exactly in Botswana?
Gaborone.
Gaborone. Oh, okay. No, great, great. Cyberbullying, for sure, for sure. And welcome, sir. So what we've been doing right now is just introducing ourselves. Possibly we would not want to know your name and then your topic in terms of what you're working on and any other information we might need to know.
I'm Nico Solo, from Liverpool, working in the Department of Education.
All right.
My topic talks to the effect of strategic planning in schools.
Okay. All right. Effects of strategic planning in schools. Effects and impact of strategic planning.
Strategic planning schools,
Yeah.
in schools.
And what got you to that topic?
In essence, I've come to realize that government came out to give our schools funding.
Yeah.
But when you then look at how they are actually utilizing the money, you realize that there are no plans that are actually in place, which will actually guide them as to how they are going to utilize the money as given.
All right.
Number two, we are also checking in terms of, when you look in terms of results in the province general,
Yeah.
even though my topic is not, my focus is not on the whole province. But when you look at that, you realize that there's a lot of money that is pumped in, but when it comes to the results thereof, it doesn't talk to what they're actually getting. And what actually brought me in, it's when I mostly will sit with underperforming schools, trying to understand as to what are the challenges and the problems that are actually facing. When you go through, you realize that one underperforming school to the other, they've got a generic kind of a behavior,
Yeah.
which is in the main lack of planning and monitoring and evaluation in the process of what they're actually doing. So
Yeah.
I just want to unearth that and see as to how best, fortunately I'm also in the planning section in the district,
Yeah.
how best can we intervene from our angle to
That's
make sure
right.
that we actually improve the situation.
Perfect. And by the way, you guys did strategic management as a module, right? You did. I suppose you're then going to use quite a bit of your knowledge and concepts from there. But yeah, I suppose you're right. Because then, strategic planning, when you talk about money and how it's being allocated and then not used for the right purposes, obviously that comes at the end of, you got some objectives and that's what you want to meet, and maybe there's a missing link somewhere there. All right? Sorry, can I just... switch off these things. I suppose it should be one of the ground rules, eh? Switch off your cell phone. All right. Now, the issue with this topic now we're going to deal with, or the section that we're going to deal with, is it actually comes towards the end of your research. So the assumption is you've already gone through, so if you talk about 5 to 6, you've gone through 1 to 4, right? You already done that. All right. And then in terms of your research, where can I say you are? Because then I would want to refer to it as we're going along. Have you already started? Have you gone through some of these chapters? Or you're still busy with the groundwork? Groundwork. You still hunting? You're on 3? 6? Oh, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. Okay. So I suppose, we would want to make it as practical as possible. Of course, our session is, by 12 o'clock we'll be done. It's purely kind of a half-day session. Now, this is just for administrative purposes. You got some queries. We got this resource, Sandra. She's the one who actually deals with some of your queries. If you've got any queries, take, for instance, your deadlines, your submissions, supervisors. I'm not so sure if you already have supervisors. But, yeah, you can always talk to her. So generally, this is the kind of your research and possibly our kind of workshops we've already had maybe. And so for chapter 5 and 6, that's what we're going to cover. But assumption, like I was saying, possibly you would have done some of that stuff, and very much interesting to know how far you've gone. And so we might need to actually do a bit of review in terms of what you've done so far. It would actually be of interest. But otherwise, that's what's expected of you. Chapters 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and then 5 and 6. This is where we are. If you're done, I suppose it's time to say goodbye and welcome them. We just started off and we're introducing ourselves just now, but it would also be interesting to know what topic you're dealing with. Maybe we would know you, your name, and then which topic you're working on.
Okay, it's all about managing unemployment in Temba Township.
Okay. In Temba Township?
Yes.
Or you decided to focus on one place?
Yes.
And why was that?
Pardon?
I'm saying why, because then that's a nationwide problem, South Africa, unemployment.
Temba Township is having a lot of crime currently. So I just wanted to focus on Temba,
Yeah.
more especially on graduates, youth.
All right.
Yes,
But don't you think maybe someone might need to use that report at a national scale? Can it be applied nationwide when you're done? You got a supervisor though, eh?
yes.
All right. No, that's great. Okay, so let's just go through chapters 1 and 4, just an overview. Maybe we could also see, in terms of what you guys are applying, your chapters 1 and 4. So that's how we're going to structure our session. Just have an overview of 1 to 4, and then we'll look at the overview of chapter 5 in terms of the requirements, and then chapter 6, and our day is done. All right. So in terms of your chapters 1 to 4 is a way of summary. So this is the expectation, what you're supposed to look at. Generally, your chapter 1 is introduction. All right? Introduction, and that's where you give us the background and the problem statement. Now, over here, and I can assure you, you guys, you're doing your master's right now, it's a problem that comes through even as you go to your PhD. That does not go away. If anything, there will be more demanded on it. So we know all research. Yes, sir. You want the slides? Okay, it's a summary. I don't know how to get you, but if you got a memory stick or so, I could give you before the end of the day. Or email, yeah, that would be easy. That would be easy, I can do that. Perfect, perfect. So all research is based on a problem, and check that out in terms of your topics. And I was actually looking out for such. You cannot do research on an issue that's not a problem. You might have some good affinity for it, high affinity for it, you love the area, but as long as there's no problem, it's more like a bookshelf, research. Nobody is really going to look at it. So all research is based on a problem, and the problem must be real. It's real, it's a world kind of problem, daily lives, and that should be a problem. And then people would have an interest in terms of the problem. And so, you would find, again, as you formulate your problem, in other words, you go to describe your problem. First of all, describe how the problem is. And so, I was having some 2 weeks ago, we got some PhDs here. And so they were doing some defense. And so as they defend, and you really look at a problem, and you're saying, what is the problem here? And you realize it's not so much of a problem, really. And so who would be interested? Or what sort of problem are you having? Because this problem should be weighty, It's a weighty problem. It's really affecting lives out here. I see some of you are actually dealing with projects that have to do with the governments. And that's a major area because then governments do have funds, they might need to apply, and essentially they're looking for, solutions to community problems. And so before they can apply funds, they'll say, what is the problem? Can we have some research on it? So as much as people talk about it, you talk about unemployment, take for instance. Unemployment, and it's a buzzword. Everybody talks about it. But can we know the extent of it? What's the depth of it, the width of, and all of it? So they might institute some research. Give us hard facts, solid figures in terms of unemployment. How wide is it? Who is it affecting? So they can only then take action based on some research done by a professional. And so that's how important it is. So each time you then do your research, make sure there is a problem. Now, how do you know that my problem is a real problem? There are a couple of tactics you can use. I hope you went through it. I'll just go through it, for the sake of it. You can apply it to your research. So if you say, I hope you can all see from here. So we're going to test this on one of your research. So I'll say, it's even worse. There's a fourth one. Is it? Okay, so take, for instance, if I say, what is the problem? Remember we're still here. We're trying to describe the problem. It's a description of the problem. What is the problem? How is it a problem? When did it become a problem? And, there's another one I'm forgetting over here. And so if you can answer some of these questions, you can then say, okay, it is a real problem for sure. So I could take one. So let's start with, you started off, huh? All right. And what's your topic, by the way? Demotivation, huh? That is the problem. And how is it a problem?
I suppose for us, because we manufacture, production goes down in the sense that our manufacturing is not automated on purpose.
Yeah.
So because it's manually done by people, if they're not motivated to do what they need to do, we then don't meet our targets for production because people are just not happy.
All right.
Yeah.
And when did it become a problem?
Since last year, I did my research on it in the organization.
Since last year. That's quite recent. And
Yeah.
it tempts one to then ask, did anything change to get to that situation? What changed?
I think because leadership and management changed as well in the organization, became an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who is affected by that problem?
So our customer is affected by that problem. We are affected by that problem because if we don't reach our targets, then the company is not paid, then they can't pay the employees. It's a ripple effect of.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one part. We just wanted to test it on yours. Huh? You see that? We just wanted to test it on yours. So normally it's one of the tactics you could use in terms of the problem description. You really want to make sure and analyze the problem so as to, just show that it is indeed such a real problem. And then also one of the characteristics of a problem is especially your topics. You guys, you've heard about variables, right? Your variables within your research. So essentially, there is one we call a dependent variable. Maybe let me use the next page. Okay. All right. And these are very much linked to your problem. So there must be some variables within your topic. So there's one we call a dependent variable, and there's also an independent variable. And those are actually quite important. So you cannot just have one aspect within a topic. I am going to change now and possibly look at another kind of research from one of you. But what we're saying is there is this cause and effect So this is a problem, right? Cause, and then the effect is seen somewhere. And so that relationship where you got a cause and effect, that comes on there. So the one that causes is independent. Cause, the effect is felt on the independent variable. So you got one that causes the problem, and then you got an effect coming through from elsewhere. So sorry. I'm not so sure what's happening to my... Something came off here. Okay, I'm looking for that. All right. So within your cause and effect. So take, for instance, let's take on another topic. What was your topic, sir?
Assessing the impact of technology in the provision of services.
The impact of technology in terms of your service provision, and that's within the Department of Home Affairs. All right. And so if we were to then say, in terms of the problem, remember we're looking at just the problem, all right? The problem, as it stands right now, you do have technology, all right? And what is the gap, which then gives us the problem?
The gap, one, the systems are always down, which affects the population.
All right. So then when they're down, you can't really, perform. You can't provide services. All right. So do you say it's a problem of technology per se, or is it something to do with maintenance? Or you got adequate technology. You don't need anything new. Would you say that?
Yeah, the challenge is if the systems are always down and people visiting the office, they can't be serviced. It is a problem.
All right. So let's take it that way. I suppose you got a supervisor already. That's good. So if we take it as it is. So it's technology and service provision. Those two. If we look at those as cause and effect. So your service provision is dependent on technology. Technology is not affected by anything. So the independent variable would be technology here, and the dependent variable is service provision. And so normally it would actually come out within your topic, the impact of technology on service provision. So you got two variables already, which are quite evident there. And one is affected by the other. Good technology or performing technology, good service provision to the public. Bad or poor technology, bad service. You see that? That's the cause and effect. And so again, you might want to look at that as you describe your problem. And this would normally affect you when you put up your topic, because that topic, as it comes up on your hardcover in terms of your research, it should show some of this so that one reads through it, they can easily tell what's coming. They can easily tell what's coming. All right. So that's your problem statement. This, I must say, is a major area. You need to work on your problem. Make sure it's a real problem affecting everybody. And only then can you have a substantive research, a weighty research. And so from the problem, I suppose purpose would then be quite easy. So you will need to state, somehow include this section. So for all of these sections, we're saying, can you please make out, can they be visible in terms of your research? Purpose, so what's the purpose of your research? And obviously the purpose would be to possibly find out some of the stuff that's related to your problem. And so, again, to clarify your research, you also need to include such things as research questions. So there's a problem, so you ask questions. But what is causing the problem, right? What is the relationship between the problem and the dependent variable, maybe? You're asking questions here. So you should have some questions, and then your questions are then followed by objectives. Now, what is the relationship between your research questions and your research objectives? What were you guys told? Is there any relationship? Or let's have an example. Who's willing to give us just one of their research questions if you pass that stage? No, we're learning from it, for sure. We will not hang you. We learn from it. A research question to say, okay, from my area, that's your area of study. And so one of your questions would be, this is the question. And then let's try and then look at the objective from there. No takers. All right. Okay, so take, for instance, unemployment. I'll go back to unemployment again. That's your unemployment. So the question then is, suppose you say you have this kind of question. So I'll call it an RQ. I hope you can see from where you are. That's a research question. What I'll call it SA. Okay, I know you're focusing on that region you spoke about, but let's call it SA. So one of the questions is, what are the causes of high unemployment rates in South Africa? That's a question that you want to find out. Because when you're researching, you're not researching on something that you already know. You want to find out. So if you already have answers, then there's no reason for a research. So you want to find out what are the causes, what are the underlying causes of that problem. So that's a question. So can you formulate an objective from such a question? How do you formulate an objective? It takes a certain pattern, and I thought maybe I would need to also, just highlight it as we go on. How do you then formulate? You are expected to have a research question or questions, and then you should have some research objectives as well. That's a must for each and every research work. All right. So normally you would find objectives are derived from your research questions. So if I say, what are the causes of high unemployment in South Africa? Your research question should then draw from the same. You're going to use the same questions, but you're now putting it as a purpose to explore the causes of high unemployment in South Africa. To find out, that's an objective now, to find out the causes of high unemployment in South Africa. So most of the time when we're doing, when we're marking these dissertations and some of these programs, you would find you have a student with some research questions. Now, if you then say, morning, welcome. If you then say, can I match your objective? So you've got, okay, so this is your research question. And then I would say your research objective would be to find out or explore the causes So you got your question, you've got your objective, and so this is question number one. This would be objective number one, and that's how it should actually follow, and that should be the pattern when you're putting across your research. What are the causes of high unemployment in South Africa? And then the research objective would then be to explore or to find out, what the causes are of high unemployment in South Africa. And that's the relationship. So if I have two research questions, most of the time you'd find you also need two research objectives. And that's how it should actually follow. Okay, hopefully you are going to go through that. And then, the significance of the study. Naturally, this you also need to state. What is the importance? So when you say significance, we're really looking for the importance of your research, because all research should be important. And so state to us, what the importance is. And then, on the latter sections, you can always then give us a brief research design. This is part of your chapter 3 though, but you could just, give us a snippet of what's to follow in chapter 3. And then give us your limitations. And normally what do you talk about in the limitations? Time, resources, for sure, absolutely. The sort of things that would actually force you to not to finish. But if I then say, so these are limitations, and if you have to talk about what we call delimitations, what would that be? So you got limitations, and then you got delimitations.
The focus areas, when you say focusing on this specifically and ruling out the others, factors.
All right, yeah, you can put that in your limitations for sure.
Like I'm researching Samson only and then maybe let review without.
I won't be looking at it. Yeah.
The delimitation.
You could put that as well, absolutely, as a delimitation. But normally also, you'd want to put the sort of stuff that's out of your control. That's a delimitation. In other words, as much as you're going to look at all of this, but there are some things which you really cannot control in terms of your variables. You can actually mention them as part of your delimitations as well. So if you say centered, you're then saying possibly the other areas, what happens there might not be within the scope of this research. All right, and then this is chapter 1, remember, and then we have your chapter outline in terms of what can we expect next and right up to the end, and then you conclude in terms of your chapter 1. Now, any questions here? Okay, this is all revision, right? Because then, remember, we headed to chapters 5 and 6. But we just wanted to make sure we're clear, and then we're also on the same boat. But this is a very important topic. Like I was saying, your first chapter, your introductory chapter, it's either your research is going to be thrown out based on your chapter 1, or it's going to be accepted from there, because it actually lays the groundwork, especially that part, which justifies the whole purpose of your research. Okay, without any questions, then I'll proceed to the next one. So your chapter 2, and that's what you guys are working on already, like you were saying. This has to do with your literature review. Now, the whole purpose and essence of it is we're saying there is no need to reinvent the wheel. So what have other guys who've walked the same road like you want to walk, what have they said? So your research is kind of different, all right? It's different, but there are certain aspects of it that can be related to some other research. Maybe as you're looking at high unemployment in South Africa, somebody looked at high unemployment and the economic state. Take for instance, it's different, but there is something to do with unemployment there. So you can actually pick a few facts from there and then use them. So that's the whole essence of your literature review. You're looking at what others have said and what you're looking for. So, we talk about key constructs. So maybe you got a couple of them. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and so forth and so forth. So you basically have some of these constructs. And by the way, what is a construct? Or can you give me an example of a construct? Or what is the opposite of a construct? All right. So we have what we call a concept, and then there is a construct. All right. So if we start off with a concept, any ideas of a concept? So if I say knowledge, very important. Innovation, very important. That's a concept. And so from what you guys have been talking about, I can pick a few concepts there. And then if you have a combination of two concepts, that makes a construct. So if I then say knowledge, management. Now we want to manage the knowledge. So it becomes knowledge management. That's a construct. So you got a concept, knowledge, you got a construct, knowledge management. So basically you're actually going to then have some key constructs. So your key constructs would be here. So take, for instance, if I have my topic, the relationship between knowledge management and innovation. That's my topic, huh? The relationship between knowledge management and innovation in organizations or high-tech organizations. That's my topic. So I'm going to have my key constructs in there. Maybe let me write the topic somewhere there so that we can check it as one of my topics. I'm looking for different markers which are hard to come. So it's the relationship between, so knowledge management, can I call it KM for the sake of space, knowledge management and innovation in yeah, maybe let's do that as a topic. So suppose that's my research topic, the relationship between knowledge management and innovation in high-tech companies. So you then say, I have some of my key constructs. So if we take on my constructs, we said this is a construct, innovation is a concept, right? If you join the two, that becomes also a construct if it's, say, innovation management, and on and on. So if I then have to analyze my research in terms of what I'm going to include in my literature review, I'll need to explore a whole lot on knowledge management. I'll need to explore a whole lot on innovation. All right. So you then need to break down your concepts and your constructs. In other words, you take us through, show us some more. So if I take knowledge management as a construct, so this is my key construct based on the research questions. So you will need to define it. What is that? So if you're talking about knowledge management, what is knowledge management? You know, to define it. Give us some background to it in terms of its historical development from its oldest form to its newest form. You know, you're going through it. What are the current knowledge and methodologies on there and its relevance to your research questions? And so and on and on and on. And so for each of your 3, maybe 4 constructs, you will need to do the same. And that way, you then explored your literature review section. You see that? Okay. And so it's essentially, the whole purpose of this now is to actually guide you and focus you. What are you going to focus on? You focus on your key concepts and your key constructs. So if I were to go through this, I tell you I'll write a whole book here. Because then, for knowledge management, I'll need to break it down into 2. First of all, I define what knowledge management is. It starts off with knowledge, all right? And so I start off with knowledge. I'll talk about knowledge. How do we get to knowledge? Take, for instance, knowledge starts off with data, goes on to information. Information is upgraded to knowledge. Knowledge maybe to wisdom, and on and on and on. And I would explore some more, right? A whole lot. And then I put it together. Next section, I will talk about knowledge management. How does it come by? And how do you manage knowledge? I'll talk about some concepts on there. I'll talk about certain processes. And there's some guys who've written about knowledge management. Take, for instance, like your knowledge cycle. Guys like Nonaka and all of them. You know, I'll cite them here. Talk about them and how it is developed. And then I would go to innovation. And you guys did innovation as a subject, right? All right. So you talk about innovation. How does it come? What are the components of innovation? And on and on and on. So I'm really just trying to show you how this is applicable. So this really guides you. For each and every one of your constructs, which are the key ones, based on your research questions, maybe that's where they're coming from, try and define them. Give us some background information. Give us the current knowledge, what that's there. Give us the methodologies that follow through each and every one of these key constructs. And then what is, the relevance of all of that to your research questions. And then you conclude. And that's a whole chapter in itself. Any questions there? You could ask us questions related to your research even, in terms of how you're seeing it. We could discuss it and talk about it related to some of these. Is it making sense though? It does. Okay, great. All right. Without any questions, I will then move on to the next one. I'm just trying to, summarize where you guys are coming from and expectations. And then your chapter 3 is to do with your research methodology. All right? Your research methodology. So, how are you going to approach your research? What sort of methods are you going to use? Now, everything in research follows some systematic pattern. It's systematic, and every academic is actually expected to toe the line in terms of the system, in terms of the chronology of this or the sequence of your writings. And so in terms of your methodology, so you're going to give us, introduction for sure, and then talk about your research design. How are you going to design your research? And normally within your research design, they would expect you to talk about your philosophy. And in academics, we always talk about philosophy. And where does this come from? When you're approaching an issue, and that's where you become philosophical a little bit, because there's always an approach. There's a thinking behind which guides you. You've got some thinking at your background, and so you're actually trying to show it, to then say, this is my background thinking as I approach this. And how is it classified? So you have some of these philosophies. I suppose you've done some of them, right? Remember? Anyone? Any one example of your philosophies? You remember that stuff you guys did on positivism, interpretivism, realism? Yeah. Those are some of your philosophies. So if you're saying I'm following a positivist approach, and what does that entail? In other words, when I see that, I will then say, okay, so you're saying, you're really looking at reality here, or interpretivism. You're acknowledging that people and situations are always different, and that's what you want to look at. That's the philosophy. And what is the approach? What is your research strategy? And then the choice, the time horizon. Now, I'm tempted to show you some other slide, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a big onion that normally comes here. You remember that onion? Yes, you got onions peeling from the outer layer right through to the inner layer. It must be in one of your slides. So you'll have to pick on one of those. Now take, for instance, for philosophies, you got no less than 4 philosophies. There is no way you can classify your research as 4 of them. So you're expected to pick on one. Pick on one of them. And on every layer, you're expected to pick one. So on philosophies, pick one. There are a couple of approaches, pick one. On strategies, pick one. What are some of your choices? Pick one. What are your time horizons? Okay. Cross-sectional. Remember that part? My research is cross-sectional, or is it longitudinal? Those are time horizons. So you tell us. You describe some of those. And then after that, you go on to your research methodology, where you then talk about the population. In other words, who are you going to focus on? Who is the population? And where are you going to draw your sample from? So if I stick with your unemployment, and that's why I asked you a bit. So you got a population in terms of unemployment, and then you're going to pick a sample. In other words, if I say I've got something going on here, maybe some lump or so. So I would then say, in terms of my population, if I go to a medical clinic and a medical doctor, they would then say, okay, That's where it is, but we cannot take off your hand. So we're going to take just a piece of the bad stuff, and we're going to test it. So we'll know what's happening in all of it. So that becomes a sample. So you got a population, and you got your sample. You'll need to define it, and also use some academic arguments on there to justify yourselves. And then you're going to talk about some of these, your data collection instruments. And normally what do you use here? Your data collection instruments? The questionnaires? Absolutely, your questionnaires. So you will talk about your questionnaire. How did you design it? How did you design your questionnaire? And you give us the background information and what to expect. And then how valid is it and how reliable is it? You go through all of these, and there's a whole lot of chronology that you can talk about. And so how do you test for validity? How do you test for reliability on these? And so you talk about your Cronbach's alpha. You remember that stuff? You've already done that. You have to go through it. And then you also need to talk about your ethical considerations. Very important. You're going to be dealing with human beings. And so for all humans, there are certain things or certain areas possibly you might be sensitive. And so what sort of considerations did you put in terms of your ethics? And so you would give us some of the categorizations of ethics and ethical observance as you observe it. Limitations and all and all.
Does the pilot study come in here on validity and reliability?
Absolutely. Now he mentions one of the important parts you have to go through, a pilot study. We know about it, right? Yes. So a pilot study comes right here. Here. That instrument. So you've designed a questionnaire, and you're going to use it to collect your data. But now you're not so sure if you start implementing it or applying it to your respondents. Are they going to respond well as in understanding what you're looking for? And you're not so sure, because then what you're going to collect as data is exactly what you're going to analyze, and it's going to affect your results. So poor data, poor results. It won't give you the solutions of the problem. So it is important. And so normally you would find as researchers, you're expected to do a pilot study. And it actually comes right here. Pilot study, you're testing your instrument to see if respondents understand. So take, for instance, if I had my population as, I'm going to test construction companies that are listed on the JSE, take for instance. They're listed on the Joburg Stock Exchange. I would then say, and I've targeted 10 of them. I'll then say, I'm going to do a pilot study on a construction company, but that's not one of the ones that I'm going to eventually take data from. So I could go to a company which is a construction company, but it's not listed on the stock exchange. And then I'll give them my questionnaire and then say, can you please answer these questions? Tell me, do you understand, all the elements on the questionnaire? If not, explain to me where and how, and that way you will be able to tell those areas where you would need some classifications or some clarifications. Maybe you need to modify your questionnaire. Take, for instance, you might need to modify your questionnaire just to make sure it's in line. And so that's your pilot study. So for sure, you're right. Your pilot study comes right here at the instrument. And then your chapter 4, thanks for the question. Any other question? All right. And then your next section is your chapter 4. And again, possibly this is where you guys ended in terms of your revision, I suppose. And so this is your findings. Chapter 3, you've given us your research instrument, your questionnaire, and immediately after that, if it passes your pilot study, then you can start collecting the data. And then your chapter 4 is essentially the presentation of your findings. So you would have your introduction, what sample size did you look at, how was the reliability. So you're really giving us the actual results here. You tested for reliability over here. You tested for it, and then on your findings, how was the reliability? So we would expect to get your Cronbach's alpha, take for instance, for validity and reliability. It comes in here. You're really giving us those statistics. You're giving us the summaries of your data. So you're going to have your graphs. You're going to have your tables, your bar charts, and all of them. you're actually presenting on here. You're just giving us as it is. At this stage, there is no analysis. You're simply just putting through what you found out. That's your presentation of findings. And so like we're saying, you're going to use a couple of these. Your tables, your graphs, your figures, a bit of descriptive statistics, a bit of inferential statistics, and then you're also going to conclude. All right. And that is your chapter 4, and these are the expectations. So for each and every one of these could actually be some of your headings and your subheadings within the topic. Expected to use all of these. And then our next section now, if you do not have questions here, would be, so we've summarized what's expected in chapters 1 to 4, and if at all you're still working on it, please make sure it conforms to the structure we've spoken about right from the beginning. And then our next section would now be to look at chapter 5. But I see my time, it's almost 10 o'clock, and you guys are supposed to go for break. All right, I suppose we can continue. Coming in just now, eh? All right. All right, so we proceed to our chapter 5 now, essentially, and to just, review what the contents would be. Any questions from our previous session arising from there? All right, so just as a way of summary, if I have to go back a little bit, in other words, we're saying your chapter 4, you presenting your findings. And here at this stage, you're just giving them as they are, giving us what you found out from your research instruments, your questionnaires, just as they are. And then your chapter 5 takes from there. And now you're actually discussing those findings, what you've actually put across. So when you put tables, when you've put figures, you've got pie charts, graphs and all of that, that's straight from your chapter 4. But chapter 5, you now need to make sense of it. What is the sense of it? So that's what you really have to go through. When you started off, you had some research questions, like we said. You got some research questions, what you intend to find, and you've got your research objectives. And there's this saying in research, and you guys remember you at master's stage. And there are some of these principles you would also need to remember. And I suppose one of them you possibly would have heard is the golden thread. Ever heard about it? You will need to follow what we call the golden thread. So it's more like you're actually following through a pattern, a certain pattern. So what you gave us at the top, so maybe you started off here as an example, and you're now somewhere down here. There must be a line that joins that, and that line is your golden thread. Because most topics you would find, if you really follow through everything else, you get lost along the maze. Because then, there are a whole lot of issues around it. If I take on any one of yours. So one spoke about motivation here. If you look at motivation as an area, there are a whole lot of things that go in there. There's a whole lot of things that go in there, and there are a whole lot of other elements that are on the peripherals of motivation. So if you really don't follow through a certain line in terms of what you're trying to pursue, you might end up chasing everything else, and your dissertation will take you a whole long time, if anything. So you will need to follow through a golden thread, and we call that a golden thread. Golden thread. Let me write it down. You can ask about it from your supervisors. They should. That's what I'm talking about. So there must be a golden thread. And so how do you make sure you're actually going along with your golden thread? And normally some of these tactics would help you. So you're starting off as much as you know you're going to discuss your results. But restate your questions. In other words, your questions are the preludes, the precursors to your research, really. They're actually leading you. So restate the question. In other words, that question would actually tell us what you're actually going after. Maybe it's one question, 2 questions, 3 questions, it's really up to you. So I got 1 here. So research question number 1, restated. So you restate it. You might have this as a subheading, but not really. You could have it as a paragraph. So when you start off within your introduction, talk about some of these things, not as a subheading, but restate it. So the research question for this study is such, and the research objective is such, and you're giving it to someone so as to bring them back into the fold again. Summarize your literature review, what others found as summarized in chapter 2. So remember, your chapter 2 is about literature review. So you're summarizing that as well. And what you're summarizing here is not new information. You're actually restating what you've already said. And in summary, in other words, you're not redoing chapter 2 per se, but you're giving us the highlights of it, which is very pertinent in terms of where you're going to. So let's get a bit of a summary from that. And then you start summarizing your findings as well. What did you find out as from chapter 4? Remember, this is chapter 5 now. So what is your chapter 4 saying? You giving us the information as raw as it is. Restate it, because then it's actually leading to where you're getting to. All right. So you've summarized your own findings from chapter 4, and then also have then a discussion. Differences, concentrate on sample profiles, methods, and instruments. And so this becomes some kind of a structure. I can assure you, in terms of your research, your structures are going to be different. You cannot have the same kind of pattern. It's always different. You can follow a certain pattern, but there must be some logical sequence in terms of why you're structuring your discussion that way. And, this is one of, the ways that could be encouraged, actually. So you're leading your discussion based on what you intended to find out. That's your research question, what you've already found out in terms of your literature. So in terms of your discussion here, what we're saying is, what you're finding out from chapter 4, can you link it to what others have said before? Is it going along? It's not supposed to go along all the time anyway. You could talk about their differences, and why do you think there are differences? Or maybe just state it here. There are differences. Why they are, you could say it a bit later. But are there any differences in terms of some other findings? So take, for instance, I showed you this kind of research. So suppose this is my kind of research, my concept. Remember my topic, the relationship between knowledge management and innovation in the technology sector. All right? And so as I was finding out, so essentially I want to look at knowledge management, which is the independent variable. The dependent variable would be your innovation. And so as I was discussing knowledge management in my literature review, I found out that knowledge management is actually made up of a couple of components. So I just want to give you as a discussion. It's made up of a couple of components. So for you to have what we call knowledge management, there must be knowledge acquisition. In other words, you should acquire knowledge. And I'm discussing, it was part of my literature review. That's what others have said. There is knowledge acquisition. You go to acquire knowledge, all right? And so there must be a process within the company of actually acquiring the knowledge. And during the acquisition, there are certain practices that you have to go through, all right? And that's part of my literature review. And then the second component is knowledge dissemination. In other words, within a company, if you're saying you're managing knowledge, apart from acquiring knowledge, you have to disseminate knowledge. In other words, you have to, pass around knowledge. Pass it, older generations to newer generations, and let the knowledge be spread all around. So that's the second component. And maybe the third component, and I'm telling you as part of my research take, for instance, all right? Then there must be some responsiveness to knowledge. In other words, companies have to respond to knowledge. There are certain things, or there's a certain aptitude they have to have so as to be able to capture new knowledge out there. And within the knowledge responsiveness, I suppose that's where you'd find storage, knowledge storage as well. So those 4 components are part of what I'm calling knowledge management. So suppose that's my research, and I've been talking about these in my literature review. So I've got all of that, I've exploded it. And so my instrument, my instrument, I then had to split it into those 4 sections. And I suppose you guys have already done that. I have split my instrument into 4 sections because then I want to find out within this technology sector if those 4 components are applicable, which companies are applying, and then we want to see their state of innovation. All right? So I split my instrument, my research instrument as the questionnaire. I'll put it into, say, 4 sections or so. So I have the top part where I talk about the demographic profile of the respondent. The second part would be knowledge acquisition. So I got questions to gauge the level of knowledge acquisition within an organization. The third section, I talk about knowledge dissemination, like I said. So I got questions around knowledge dissemination, all right? And then the fourth part, I have the responsiveness to knowledge. So do companies store knowledge? And I got all those questions, all right? That was my instrument. Now, in terms of my discussion and when I'm saying differences, so my respondents, as they came through and gave me their responses in terms of those and how these companies within that sector are doing it, how did they perceive my 4 components within the knowledge management? You might find that some writers have said there are those 3-4 components within knowledge management, but when I administered my questionnaire, the respondents did not perceive that. They actually perceived knowledge acquisition, knowledge dissemination, responsiveness to knowledge, knowledge storage, all of them, they perceived it as one. They perceived it as one. And they just call its own knowledge management. Whether it's acquiring, dissemination, responsiveness, we don't separate it that way. It could be a finding. So I would say, in my discussion, all right, as much as in the literature review earlier on, other writers have found out that knowledge management is made up of all of those. But in terms of my own respondents, there was a difference because these guys couldn't actually perceive it as different. All of those components, they perceived it as one. Those are differences. I'm just trying to give you an example of where differences could come through. So in other words, your findings could be different from what the literature review had said, from what others found out. And then your discussion goes on and on and on and on. Any questions there?
To check with you as well. So I'm doing a quantitative study, right? So my literature review has some quantitative studies in there, but can I add a qualitative study in there for just for the findings?
It would actually be good. And what's your topic, by the way?
Some martial arts motivators in relation to personal development.
All right. Now, so your quantitative and qualitative. It would actually be very important. I wanted to possibly put it down over here. So you've got your quantitative. All right. Well, I'll not go through the definitions of these. I suppose you guys have done it before. So quantitative, you really crunching numbers there. Huh? You're crunching numbers. One would expect to have some statistical analysis and all of it. It's all there. So a number is a number. And that's where your qualitative would come to be. So if you say 50% fall here and other 50% on the other side. Motivation, maybe based on salaries, take for instance, and people would just say, we happy, quantitative, the ones that are happy about their salary are 20%. The ones that are unhappy about their salary is 80%. That's where it is. But now, that's all what quantitative would do. If you then add on a qualitative section, qualitative is kind of descriptive. It actually gives you the broader section of it, and it's actually very important. So you'd get some descriptions there. Why are you not happy about your salary? And so people start, talking, and they describe the situation. And your qualitative captures those statements. You should be able to capture the statements because these are the salary structures, and you'd get some happenings within the companies, and that could actually be new information which would help you in terms of your analysis and what you meant to find out. So those descriptions, which are really kind of personal and they're different, would then help you to broaden your study. So by all means, if you can do a qualitative, comes right. But it comes with demands. All right.
And just for the literature review, the summarizes.
Say again.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm just going to add one in the literature review to see what I found.
Yeah, so it's firstly on the literature review for sure. You then have to talk about the literature review for that kind of study in terms of qualitative. In other words, your methodology, how you intended to do it, you should add it on. But on your discussion, so you should also then have a section that's dedicated to your qualitative study. So you also then have to do some analysis. And so the assumption is you are well versed with some of the concepts or the ways of analyzing qualitative information. And I suppose we're going to talk about a bit of it. I hope it's in here, because then I take it with the other groups, who are doing it full time. You are then expected to go through the qualitative methodologies for analyzing qualitative information. So you must be conversant with some of those, like content analysis. So you would have to have said it in your methodology that I am going to use a mixed methods because I'm going to employ quantitative and qualitative. And then for my qualitative analysis, I'm also then going to employ content analysis in terms of drawing meaning and making sense of what people said.
My one is it's only quantitative.
It's all,
Not mixed, that's only quantitative.
it's only quantitative.
I'm thinking of just adding a qualitative on the literature review only,
Yeah.
just for a picture of.
All right. So when why I'm saying this is for you to be exhaustive, because then the examiners, and I do it from time to time as always an examiner, the moment you mention that, I'll look out for it elsewhere. So if I see it in your methodology and I see it in your data that you applied it, I'll look for it in your discussion of findings as well. Have you presented something? Otherwise it might also become your shortfall or your shortcoming eventually. Yes?
Can't you just put it as like a case study example? Like, so you say, I may have looked at this case study and this person used qualitative research, but not necessarily use it in his study. Because I think, like you're saying, if he then says it's in your literature, then you have to do a qualitative study. Is that allowed? To say, I've used this as a case study.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing a case study.
No, I'm not, but I'm just saying for him, if he really wants to add it in, can he not say it's a case study, for example?
So my literature
All right.
review has three quantitative,
Yeah.
not in quantitative, but I'm just thinking of adding a qualitative in the literature.
Yeah. But you get her point.
Yeah, you think?
Or maybe, were you drawing your sample? We're just learning from it, really. Yeah, you could share some of these things with us.
For example,
Yeah.
going from my gym members,
Yeah.
in that particular martial art that I'm studying.
And it's just at this particular place.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, then a case study would work very well. You then be specific about a case study being done at Virgin Active, which is situated at such a place. You're quite specific. And you're going to then look at that place, analyze the data at that place. So if it's Virgin Active over here in Centon, take for instance, you then say, but your results can then be generalized elsewhere to all gyms for Virgin Active or any other for that matter, maybe who are involved in there. So case study can actually do. It can do. But it doesn't take away the demands, like I was saying, the demands of your analysis. The moment you say, I'm doing a quantitative, your marker will then say, okay, so I'm waiting to see some quantitative analysis here. And if you say then, I also have qualitative. So they're also looking for those two now, to say, I'll see quantitative, I'll also see qualitative. Because if you mention qualitative in your literature review and your methodology, your results should present some qualitative information as well.
I think it's safer if you just stick with one.
Yeah, for the sake of time and maybe some of these demands as well. If you think it's going to be so much of a burden on you, stick on one. Stick to one. Stick to one. All right. Yeah. So these are some of the. But can you relate this? Because the whole essence of some of these is to relate to your kind of study. Can you relate some of these to what you guys are doing, especially for the guys who are on? Nobody's on chapter 5 yet, but I saw someone who's on chapter 6. Where is the register? It's here. Okay. Oh, did you capture your topic, or what are you studying, or what are you doing research on?
On music piracy.
Music piracy. Oh, that's a problem, that. And who's affected by that? artist. Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting stuff. I suppose those guys who've been doing some raids in Joburg, it's all about piracy as well. Eh? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense from that direction. Yeah, it does. All right. So yeah, thanks for mentioning. But you need to then apply all of these to your kind of research. You know, when you go through and you're really making discussions over here. Yeah, I see some guys who've gone past this chapter. You will need to apply it to your topic. But you can always raise a question as we go along, and we can always help each other. So for each of your 2 to 3 research questions, same application. Do the discussion. Make sense of it. At this stage, we already seen your results, but make sense of it. In other words, how do you make sense? You compare, you contrast, and that's what it is. You compare. Okay. Oh. So you compare, you do some contrasts, you make sense of it, make sense. In other words, we're looking for meaning here. What does it mean? And all of this is part of your chapter 5, that discussion. Compare, contrast, meaning, and how do you compare? How do you contrast? Obviously, you're looking at your work, you're looking at what others have done, like we're saying here, what others have done in the past, some results, and so you're looking at some authoritative writers, some other guys who've done research like yours. What did they find out? How's yours different? Can you link some of the facts you're finding out over here to anywhere else? So if we take as the piracy, whether it's music or those guys who take labels and they give us the fake ones and all of it. So you're comparing, you're contrasting. You could compare South Africa, you could compare it with other places we've done or we've had the same problem. Ultimately, because where is the solution? All research should end up with a solution. And that's why you'd compare, you contrast, you find similarities, differences, make sense of it, and on and on and on and on. All right. And that, remember, we're looking at some questions you had, research questions, and at this stage, you're looking forward to answering those questions. And that's where this statement would actually emanate from. To say, why is it simple? Because you're answering your own questions. So you're looking out for your questions, and you want to answer them, and that way, as you answer your own questions, you're coming out with the solutions to your research. Research objective comes from your research question. In addressing the research problem, the following objectives form the basis of study. Now, this is some research that was done. Take, for instance, I had some dissertation which was like that, and I think this guy was saying they wanted to study the Chinese. They were worried about being unconscious. Suppose you're unconscious and you've got a disease that gets you eventually unconscious, and then you want somebody else to know of your state. And China, the kind of population they have. And so this person was saying they wanted to explore of some kind of technology. In other words, this is some kind of a gadget which, if you fall unconscious, it alerts some of your relatives and friends and some of that sort. And so they wanted to then check the citizens' knowledge of that kind of gadget, which would actually notify your close relatives if at all you get unconscious at some point. And so they are stating here research objectives. In addressing the research problem, the following objectives form the basis of study. So reviewing what you started off with, to determine the citizens' knowledge of that gadget, to ascertain the perceived importance of that gadget in the daily lives of the citizens, and then to establish that gadget as a product design, its design that would most appeal to the broader consumer market, and then to explore a strategy to promote the mass adoption of that gadget in China. Now, do you see the sequence or the kind of wording we have here? These are objectives: to determine, to ascertain, to establish, to explore. Can you possibly make if we put it in reverse, what sort of questions would there have been? So these are objectives, and like we said earlier on, objectives are drawn from questions, right? Objectives are drawn from questions. Where is that? Yeah, it's right here. So we had a research question here. What are the causes of higher unemployment in South Africa? And then the objective was to find out or to explore the causes of higher unemployment in South Africa. So I'm saying, for those kind of objectives, what do you think the questions would have been?
What is the knowledge of citizens concerning MEIS?
Yes. To determine the citizens, what is the knowledge or what is the level of knowledge of the citizens of an MEIS, correct. So that's a research question for the first objective. And so for the 4 objectives, there must be roundabout or roughly 4 questions that go with it. What do you think would have been the second question over here?
What is the importance of MEIS in the daily lives of the citizens?
True.
Or the effect? What is the effect? It's just that it talks about the importance there.
Yes. You want to find out about the importance. So what is the perceived importance, for sure, of the MEIS in the daily lives of those citizens? This one, what do you think? Sorry, for the third one, what sort of question would actually come from here? Do you get it? I just want to see if you guys can draw questions. Draw questions, yeah?
What product design will appeal to the broader consumer market?
Yes, that's the question. What product design would appeal? And so from that question, to establish the product design that would appeal to the consumer market. And that relationship, please take note of it. And I'm just coming over here. Because when you do a chapter 1, we'll look at your research question, and then we'll look at your research objective. And those should be linked. So there's no way you can have a question, and then your objective, your question goes left, your objective goes right. Already, you've lost it there. Your research is all over the place. It won't be approved. It has to be linked, and we then have our golden thread we're talking about. Yeah, and all of these. So these are some of the research objectives for that guy. And you want to answer these. So when you get to this topic, when you present your findings, obviously we want your findings and your discussions to then center around these 4 areas. And then you're actually answering your own questions. You have to answer those questions because you wanted to determine that, you wanted to ascertain that, you wanted to establish that, you wanted to explore that. And so your findings, give us, what did you get? What did you get from there? That link, very important. Any questions? Hope it makes sense. Okay. Now, this is where we got this in terms of the dissertation. This person, that's the name, in 2016 as an example. And so, now the knowledge. To determine the citizens' knowledge of that. All right? And then look at that discussion. It's part of your dissertation, take for instance. And these are some of the findings. The Chinese knowledge about that gadget was measured using 3 factors. Being 1, how much they knew about the concept of the MEIS. Secondly, how regularly they carried out some form of emergency contact information. And then thirdly, how many people they knew who would use a commercially available MEIS gadget. The fact that the overwhelming majority, which was 87% of the respondents, stated that they knew nothing or very little about that gadget, it validates the researchers' inability to discover any commercially available MEIS in China, and suggests a possible explanation for the apparent lack of commercial MEIS offerings in China. All right. So this, It's just a description, just to show you. It might not make sense in terms of your own research. But this person is, and as you can see, this is chapter 5, and possibly it's chapter 5, section 3, and they're dealing with the knowledge of that. And obviously, there is a reason why they are doing it, because if you go to their first chapter, section 1.4, they had objectives, and one of the objectives was to find out the citizens' knowledge of this. Now, when I see this, and I come over to chapter 5, and I see this being addressed here, he's focused, or she's focused, whoever that is, in terms of research. They're really following that line. You're looking out for such. And your discussion then should actually follow from your research objectives what you set out to discover. Are you discovering it? And that's the whole essence of chapter 5. Any questions there? All right. And so, section 5.5, preferred product design in China. And why are they talking about it? Because they're talking about the product design in China. If I come back here, there is a place where they wanted to find out any preferences in terms of the design of that gadget. All right? So to establish the product design that would most appeal to the broader market. And so then they dedicate this section to addressing that part. Considering the extremely low levels of knowledge and on and on and on, I'm not going to read everything there. These results were in line with the literature findings. Now there's something happening here. Apart from addressing that section where they have to give us an answer, you set out to find out that. But are there any differences? You're comparing, you're contrasting, similarities, differences. And they are saying here, these results were in line with the literature findings that MEIS have been evolving from static information types to electronic information types. And then they cite those writers, and this is coming from literature review. As you can see, it's very much related. This was done in 2016, the dissertation, and they are citing work which was cited in 2014, 2013, as you can see from there. And so, yes, in line, so there are some similarities right there. You see those? The contrasting, the comparing, similarities found. And, so you talk about it, and you can always then cite those other differences or similarities as you go on. Okay, so this is what I've been talking about. Performance measurement system. Now, this is a different research. Unfortunately, when you guys were doing chapters 1 to 4, you possibly would have seen the dissertation, and that's the assumption of my slides. And so this was another guy who was looking at small to medium enterprises and, performance measurement systems in there. Take, for instance, that's a topic. All right? And comparing and contrasting. So you have the second research question which was asked here in terms of that research, which is different. What role does a formal performance management system play in the overall success of an SME in Gauteng? That's the question, okay? Question and style, answering style, question and answer style, all right? In the literature reviewed in chapter 2, so this was the question, possibly coming from chapter 1. In the literature reviewed in chapter 2, performance management systems are found to play a crucial role in supporting general management functions, like we're saying, such as your setting of goals, such as monitoring of performance, business units, linking communication between internal and external stakeholders, and then facilitating organizational learning and identifying directions. All right. So that was the question. That's the answer. But you see, that question, which was asked in chapter 1, is being answered by literature. Maybe you really don't have to find out in terms of your questionnaires, but you're actually answering that based on the literature. And so a question is answered, and it's part of your discussion of chapter 5. And so you go on, at least we now know that, okay, so that's what he's saying. There is some link there. There is some relationship. You can actually use that. Any questions? All right. It's unfortunate you're not there yet. I would have possibly wanted you to share some of your links in terms of your own research. But take, for instance, I had this other guy take, for instance, maybe over there. This study, however, found that a formal performance management system plays no significant role in the overall success of SMEs in Gauteng. This discrepancy, contrasting, may possibly be explained by two factors. Firstly, sample studied by that one included a larger SME sample that had been operating successfully for maybe 10 years, all right? Whereas in the sample in this study, it had been operating successfully maybe for just over 3 years. It is quite possible then that the SMEs in this study, might come to rely on performance management systems more heavily in the future. You see that? So these are comparisons. Can I close? Oh, you can. All right, thanks. All right, so these are comparisons, and again, you see some justifications. And that's the whole essence of chapter 5. And I hope you can get that. You have your results, you're presenting them, you're justifying them. As long as you cannot then justify what you found out, or as long as you cannot make sense or give meaning to your findings, then your chapter 5 is as good as not so useful. Not so useful. In other words, we're trying to make sense of it, give meaning. Remember that. Give meaning, and that's the purpose of chapter 5. Any questions? But also, do you notice in all of it, there is some reference to what you've said in the past as you go through chapter 5. Something you said when you started off, and then where you are giving meaning. And that's what's exactly happening here. This study found out this. Maybe this person had a question about performance management in SMEs. It was part of the questions. And so it's being answered over here. And that is very important. And so for every objective, there must be an answer, which then gives you a condition. How many objectives are adequate in a research? What do you think? How many objectives should you have, maximum? Or should they be maximum anyway? Yes, sir. Yeah. That's right. So, but if I have 20 objectives, how's that? You're not focused? Yeah. You can't be focused then. Yeah. Because then you'd have to go through each and every one of those objectives, 20 of them, and have answers about the 20. Have answers about the 20. So it's the Department of Education, right? And you have all of those questions, and there are real problems. So when you take that research to the department, they will then say, what were the findings before we can implement this and before we can throw money at it? Do we have answers? So as long as you don't have the answers, then that report is as good as useless. Yeah. So as a concept, you will need to remember that. Any other question? So you can have a minimum of 1, 2, but now be considerate, knowing that there is this demand that for all your questions and your objectives, you should provide answers and an analysis to it. So it's up to you. The judgment is yours, but you will need to be quite discreet about it. But I see most of you are past chapter 2. Are past chapter 2 in terms of your topics. So can you, you guys got a piece of paper with you there? You got a piece of paper? Or some notebook? Can you please write down where you are? Your topic, as different as it is, write down 3. Give me a minimum of 3 research objectives. A minimum of 3 research objectives. I'll come around. I want to see those. Just 3. About your topic, what your research objectives are. Just 3 of them. You can't answer them now because then that's a section that would come a bit later. I just want to see how they look like. So I got your email addresses here. I'm going to send you these slides on the email addresses I'm seeing here. Finished? Okay, it's all right. All right, let's share. Let's share. So this time we're starting from this side. So you're 3. Now we know you're doing about the gym, right? Okay. So what's your first objective there?
So I've got the topic is examining the martial arts experience and motivators of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with one specific martial arts at my gym, Gracie Bar, Sunny Hill. Okay, so my research objectives are, I've got 4 specific motivators to establish a relationship between participation and motivator. So the motivators are self-esteem, self-actualization, skill mastery, and value development. So I'm just going to establish participation to those. And then in that's the first main objective. And the sub-objective, the next one is to investigate the number of years of training, more experience to those motivators. So people that have been training for longer, more, people value those more. And then that's the second. And the third one is the frequency of training. So people that are training more often, they find more relation to those.
Go over the first one again.
The first one is establish the relationship between participation in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to those 4 motivators. The 4 motivators are self-esteem, self-actualization, skill mastery, and value development. So they're more motivators of growth than transformation.
Okay. I'm tempted to ask about the problem again. What was the problem in that area?
Well, the problem is we're trying to find what are the motivators for people doing martial arts, right? Because the problem that I found globally is that people want, tools for improvement themselves, for personal development. Okay? So one of the things we can use martial arts as a tool to see how effective is that in those growth.
All right. So you guys, what do you think? What do you think about that description?
And the second, the split up is from a marketing approach to identify consumers of martial arts and identify their needs as well.
Yeah.
Martial arts is a global consumer product.
All right. So you need to do a bit of refinement. The way I'm hearing you is already you're looking at those 4 areas, the motivators you call them. All right. And I was saying, but where are these coming from? Because remember, your objectives are coming from, or your question.
From my literature review.
You're not there yet. All right. Because then we're looking for your research objectives, remember? And we're saying research objectives emanate from your questions. So there's a problem followed by a question. There is a problem followed by a question. So then that question would lead you to the purpose now, which is the objective. So that line, you badly need it. There was someone who spoke about cyberbullying, all right? Cyberbullying, problem, right? Cyberbullying, problem. Question, but what causes, cyberbullies to be who they are, or what's the cause of cyberbullying? So the objective would be then to explore the causes of cyberbullying. You see that line? So we're looking for that line before you go. So now when you start talking about those motivators, okay, those could come later for sure, but at this stage, problem, question, objective. That's the link. Because then from the problem, from the question, and then the objective, when you get here, you then have an analysis of the question, you're now answering it in terms of the findings. So your motivators would come in chapter 2, which is your literature review. You would have to tell us more about those 4, how they are related to martial arts, and possibly then you could then use them to answer right at the end. But as you ask your question, which is based on the problem, and then you formulate that objective, very important, because then it will come back again over here. Sorry, it's just to try and explore some more.
Okay, clarify.
Yes. And then Miss Kumalo, now I have the names here, I can tell you next. Yeah.
Yeah, the topic is on factors affecting music privacy of independent artists in Johannesburg.
That's the problem.
That's it. And, the objectives is to examine the cultural factors that affect the music privacy, to examine the legal factors, to examine the
And what was the, take us to the question as much as you, what would have been the questions there? Would have been the questions. So remember, your objective is coming from the question. You missed this part, I know. Yeah, but this part. So you're giving me your objectives, which are here. Or maybe let's put it different, because then it could take you a whole long time. I see you talking about culture there. So where is culture coming from? So the problem is piracy, for sure, right? So your problem would be piracy and what's causing it, but already you're giving us some undertones about it's a cultural problem.
It's a cultural problem of people stealing from others.
All right.
Parents, artists will compose and develop the songs and sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a culture of not buying but stealing and selling
Yeah.
to others.
All right.
We see nothing wrong with that.
Okay. And we see nothing wrong with that. Now, when you say we see, now that's specific to a geographical place. Is this problem so prevalent in South Africa, in Africa only, or elsewhere around the world?
We looked at Johannesburg, but we found out that it's prevalent in a lot of other places.
In a lot of other places, including other continents as well.
Including other continents.
Yeah, I would suggest take out the culture part of it then. Take it as a problem which is prevalent amongst citizens, because in culture you'd need to then explore all of these other places. I'm not so sure at this stage. You can then do culture after chapter 2. Maybe somebody wrote somewhere, and I think that's your basis of it. You read it somewhere, or you've already established that it's a culture of not wanting to pay and stealing. But at objective level, find out what causes piracy and all of this stuff. But yeah, that link, it goes on and on. All right, thank you. Yes, your objectives?
Okay, my topic is on the impact of cyberbullying in the place using social networking. So my focus in Botswana, my focus was in a place called Haraham, it's a rural area.
Yeah.
We actually employed about 68 IT officers to teach the small kids in primary school how to use technology, especially to type and so to play games using the iPad. So my objectives was to determine the impact of social networking in the workplace
Uh-huh.
in rural areas. The second one was to determine what measures or guidelines can be adopted in the workplace to prevent cyberbullying in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was to draft a policy to Parliament through Ministry of Information and Technology that can be elected in the workplace to prevent cyberbullying.
And those are the three, the three of them.
Yeah.
All right. So I see your chronology. You want to establish cyberbullying and the activities on the internet, and then ultimately you want to come up with a solution which should be drafted to curb.
Actually, I work in a telecommunications regulator.
Yeah,
We regulate the telecommunications sector in Botswana and communication and broadcasting.
yeah.
So this thing is something that has been going on in many countries.
Mm.
So to only prevent that, because it affects people in terms of stress, some they get demotivated, some they commit suicide.
Mm.
So we want to prevent that. But for us to only know what is the problem and how to solve it is through when we found all the information and drafted policy that
Yeah.
will be taken to Parliament. If they accept and pass it, then it will be used in good places to
And-
prevent such.
And that was my next question. Suppose it's not adopted and it's not approved, and so there won't be legislature changes to take some of your recommendations. What would we say about your research? Have you failed?
I have to do more research wider within the country. And like I said, it has already been proved. I remember there was a time it even came out in the papers.
Yeah,
People were experiencing that, not only the workplace, even in social media.
yeah.
So that will address that.
What do you guys think? Are you following other people's research? That part where she says ultimately they want to come up with a change of legislature to address the problem as part of your research? Are there no slippery places there? Or what are the pitfalls? Yes, sir.
My understanding of the matter is she doesn't have much control over the voting because it then needs a third party to agree or to disagree.
Yeah.
Because if those effects, as government, will see that they are actually exposing our own
Yeah.
in actually improving the status quo, we may decide to ignore it because we know that it is actually, it might in the end create chaos to us because of maybe wrong spending.
Mm.
Instead of channeling the money to actually assist those people, then we find ourselves doing a lot of nothing with the money. And at the end of the day, might even lead to an uprising.
Mm. There you go. Absolutely. And I like the first part, that where you started off from, to then say the part of legislation and changing of it, you might not really have control over that. And so to then spell it out in your research, to say ultimately, that's where we're headed to. We want to, propose a change. Well, proposing is something else, but we want to have a change of legislature. You then have control over that. So there's a better way. It's a good purpose, for sure. Your third objective, I like that one, because then ultimately that's what you want to have, you want to see happening. And you already know about some happenings, like you're saying. But I think it's more safer to say you want to, at the end of the day, to have a proposal on such a change.
I said to draft.
To draft, say it again.
I said to draft a policy to Parliament, to the Ministry of Information and Technology, to be enacted to implement this. Who, us as the regulators, we can just write whatever that we see. We submit to our ministry. It's up to the ministry whether they will discuss it with the Parliament, whether it will pass or not. It's not that we are going straight through the Ministry of Information Technology.
So the department you're talking about is where you work, right?
Yes.
And your department can actually have such proposals
Yes.
of policy, right?
Actually, they look unto us to always propose.
Absolutely. But, and take yourself out of that department. It's you doing this research. And first of all, you're going to have a hurdle of convincing your department to say, this is it.
So it's my organization.
Yes. All right. So from a, the academic perspective, we're saying,
We
so
have a research department actually.
yeah, all agreed, and what the department does. But we wanted you to separate yourself. This research is for you alone, eh? So you are going to propose to your department of this policy change. Your department is going to adopt your research and then pass it on to Parliament, whichever way. Absolutely. So you want to separate this and take yourself as a person. And so rather take it as ultimately you want to come up with a proposal to your department of legislature change, so that at least you're not responsible for what happens after that. But otherwise, it's a good purpose, but we're just talking about the wording here. But I think the objective is well meant.
Draft is not.
Not to draft, you can't do that. But you can put up a proposal of a draft. A proposal of a draft to your department, who will then have to accept it and then pass it on again.
Yeah, maybe
It's just the wording. But purpose, well meant. Purpose, well meant. Because then you want to take it right up to the end. Sorry, and yours, sir?
My research on my topic is assessing the impact of technology, the provision of services in the Department of Home Affairs.
Right.
So my objectives are trying to explore why are the life capture systems always down.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, the impact systems sometimes affect the citizens, those who are supposed to get services. And the last one is the credibility or reliability of the department by citizens. How do they perceive it?
All right. So, all right, I'm just trying to ring it in my head as purposes, as an objective, right? So give me a second one, as an objective, a purpose, what you want to find out.
The impact the system sometimes have on citizens.
to find out the impact of the downtime on citizens.
How do they affect them?
All right.
Systems are down, our citizens are affected.
Okay. And the third one?
The credibility or reliability by citizens as they look into the department in terms of it not providing services as it could because of the system that.
Now, what do you guys think? What do you think? You know, the academic space, we look, we explore, we criticize for constructive purposes, for sure, and just to see if you're getting the gist of it, and that's why I'm throwing it back at you. When you listen to that, and then you want to research and ultimately come up with solutions, well, what do you think? Yes, sir.
My take on what is raising is that at least he has control over it.
Right.
The fact that it's within the system, the experiences that is actually happening as and when the clients are coming, as and when there will be no internet connectivity or the systems are down. And also the reactions that he gets from the citizens. To say, we have used our money coming here, I've used my last money coming here, and what then happens thereafter? Who repays me for coming here to only find that the functions are not, the systems are not functioning? I'm just not sure as to, at the end, in terms of the final product. How is it then going to be translated into sharing the information with the affected citizens? Then say, as a branch, for instance, we don't have control over these systems. We can only give recommendations to say, our people are suffering based on these things. Can't it be improved for the betterment of services at this level? And also for the reduction of, because in one way or the other, it might even lead to service delivery protest. That they will think of going to work only to find that the gates are locked.
Yeah.
And you are no longer wanted in there because you can't provide services as a body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, so as to improve, oh, it's happened again. So I captured two important aspects of your research. You talk about the impact of the downtime, right? And then the perception of the affected parties, who are the citizens, in terms of the downtime, what they feel about it. So it's an expression of, you know, their feelings and how they are affected by all of that. But there's one core area I thought you being silent on, you might need to actually put up some objective or a question, you know, because then the department itself, they possibly have an idea about this system which is down from time to time. They might also have some of the sentiments about the citizens. They're not happy about it. And then what next? What next after that? So for the department, I think they would want to know more about this. You want to find out the root cause. I'm calling it a root cause analysis. You don't put it that way, but you might need to explore on what causes those downtimes. Maybe they need to change the system. So remember, findings, and we're going to go to the next section where you have to come up with recommendations. They must be weighty. So if you have complaints from citizens, the best thing you can then say in your recommendations is, can you please address it, that system, so that the citizens are happy? But that might not warrant a dissertation research, as in, you really want to explore that. But you want to give solutions to them, say they are not happy for sure, it's a fact, And you want to also explore what causes it. Is it a system thingy? Is it a manpower thingy? And so, and in your literature review, and I hope you're getting why I'm doing this, because then I want to show you some of the explorations you can then go through. Do you guys know this thing? Yes, the fishbone. Yeah, that's your fishbone analysis. All right? And normally it's used when you're doing a root cause analysis. Possibly you'd have done it in one of your modules. So in terms of the fishbone, I think it's got 5 elements. What's one of them? You remember that? And there's something else there. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5th one. So what are you trying to do here? So take, for instance, you're a manufacturer. There's somebody who's doing manufacturing over there. So you're doing garments, clothes. So at the end of the day, when you have your shirts, your trousers, your blouses coming out here, you've got some rejects. You guys know what rejects are, eh? Yeah, things that don't come out right. We even have a shop that sells rejects. What's that shop? You go there, there's something wrong with the garments all the time. All right. So rejects are not good because at the end of the day, you cannot recover your costs. You cannot sell it at a full price, full throttle. Something is wrong. So naturally, you would expect some level of rejects, but there's an acceptable level. So for every run, so effective manufacturing, in every run, in effect, you would say, we expect about 20 garments to be rejects. Now, for every run, you end up with 100. There is a problem there. And that's typical of what you want to explore. There is a problem there. Why are they 100? The acceptable level is 10, take for instance. So you want to find out. So as you're trying to find out, and the root cause analysis, you're saying, is it something to do with machines? In other words, when you're manufacturing, are we having some blips on some machines and then we end up with a reject? Is it something to do with manpower? In other words, the people that we're using, are they well trained? Are they the ones that are eventually coming up or causing this problem? Take, for instance, is it the process that we're using? And this applies to all industries, wherever you are. And there are more. And we normally talk about 5 M's of your, And then materials, yes. There is materials, what you're putting in there. And then the environment as well. Thank you very much. The environment that you're working under. So you want to explore such. And at the end of the day, it will not be the 5 of them, but it's one of them. The way you're sounding, I think it will be somewhere here, which is your technology, right? The problem is here. Now you want to drill down on machinery. Is it the type of system that you're using? Is it the service providers themselves? And so you can then find a fault within that area. And then when you get here, machinery, then we need to get a new system. Because there's some big countries like us, South Africa, and there are certain systems and they're efficient. What sort of systems are they using? You can then recommend a change of systems and even give some suggestions. Look at a country, we're in BRICS, BRICS. What is India using? What is Brazil using? What is Russia using? And in all of these guys, or, the first world country, what are the Canadians using? What are the Americans using? And all of it. So your research, when you do that, the big boss at Home Affairs will then say, oh, I want to see this. And then possibly, there is our solution. I can give it to this guy and say, hey, can you go and implement this? And that's the whole purpose of a dissertation. And so your objectives now, like we're saying, again, to make them weighty. All right. Yes, sir.
Can you also maybe, apart from checking from other countries, also check with other departments within government as to how are their systems also running?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who's providing their systems? If it's related to what you guys do. SARS as well, eh? Oh yeah, so SARS do quite a bit of, deal with externals. So what sort of system are they using? So those comparisons, compare contrasting differences, similarities, you can also use that. But it starts off at objective level, and that's why I'm taking you down to your objectives, because it's your objective, your purpose to find out. So what you want to find out is exactly what comes out of it, of your report at the end of it. All right, yes sir. And yours? Now it's your turn.
The effects and impact of strategic planning in schools.
That's the topic,
Yeah.
right?
Then to establish if schools have the knowledge of strategic planning.
Okay.
Number two, to also establish the effects and impact of non-planning by schools on results.
Okay.
To raise an awareness on the importance of strategic planning by schools or any organization.
All right. What do you think? No comment.
And I want to let them must comment.
Yes, yes, they have to. They have to.
They must say something.
Is
Yeah.
it not concentrating it into a certain area? Whereas it's like it's open, there's open blank page.
Yes.
So, like, I mean, from the teachings, they've always said that you have to have a specific area that you are studying. So that doesn't, so that's when you can get the results, rather than to open it, because you can't do the whole country.
Mm.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think of what-
Now, and exactly that. And in fact, that was going to be my comment as well, to say what you've done now is your objectives are based on the subject. So you're looking at strategic planning, the sequence, are they aware of it? Are they implementing it? And, strategic planning and all of it. But remember, your research is based on a problem. Where is the problem there? So your questions are about a problem. And from the questions, you then draw down your objectives. And you kind of general in terms of the area of strategic planning, but you need to focus on the problem. And you describe the problem very well, and it's real in terms of the Department of Education, like you said. The problem is there, and so let's have some objectives that focus on the problem, and then you would have questioned the problems there. Questions, what causes that kind of problem you were talking about? And then try and explore the problem. Of course, in your research, you're then going to talk about all of those elements you're talking about. Essentially, you're going to go through the strategic planning process, the whole strategic management process eventually. You're going to apply the elements of it, but you have to be specific on the problem in terms of your objective. So find some objectives maybe that also look at the problem itself. And that's the part you're talking about.
In instance, I did not want to be specific.
Oh, it was purposeful.
Yes.
And why was that?
That is why if you come and check as to what I wrote,
Yeah.
it talks to a particular focus area.
Or you then focused on your,
Yes. So
all right.
I needed to get more and we learned it a bit.
Okay.
But,
All right.
But I must also say, in terms of certain things that you raised, it also opened up my eyes on the other side of this whole process.
Yeah. No, if it was purposeful, then for sure. But actually, you will need some focus area. That's requisite. Very much required. Yeah.
The second question is that, on that research, are you researching, looking at schools, or are you researching looking at the Ministry of Education? Because for these strategies to be rolled down to schools, the impact has to come from the top, which is the Ministry of Education. If they don't teach the schools the heads how to roll down the strategies, there's no way the schools can roll it down properly. It would be just a white horse.
Mm.
Can I come in?
Yeah.
I think maybe she might have missed my intuition. I'm not talking about strategies. I'm talking about strategic planning, planning in itself. Yes, in the process you may talk to strategies that they will be implementing as and when they come out of the strategic planning session. Isn't it the basis? It's our schools planning, and as they are not planning, what then comes in, or if they are planning, to what extent and to what level are they planning?
What kind of planning are you talking about? How they execute their duties or?
How they are going to part of it is that, part of it isn't it they are given money that they have to spend. They've got to produce results. How do they intend achieving the results? How do they intend spending the money? It is not more about training. It is more about planning.
Now this planning, is it supposed to come from the school or is it something that they have to be taught so that they can use it that way? Because if I'm given a budget within my cabinet, but we didn't sit down to say, okay, this one we're going to use for this, we're going to use. The planning is not laid down properly, then I'm not going to be able to produce results. I have to be taught from the top then, so that when I use my budget, I know I have to do it. Because also it has to have, like normally in the workplace, you know you have to, for you to produce results, you have PMS, performance management system, which lays down everything that you have to do. From that, that's when you can produce the results. And with that PMS also, your budget is linked to that. When you use that money, it's linked to the budget and the PMS. When both of them are used, they produce results. If they are not used properly, still they won't produce results, and the money they can still use it, but the other way around.
I'm enjoying this input.
Yeah, same here.
What I want to say is that when you are given money,
Yeah.
it's not a blank check. In terms of school, it is even stipulating as to this percentage should do this should do that, this should do that, this should do that.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, are they planning to a level that what it's actually stipulated for, are they using it for it? Or they, you see the issue is, I'll actually manipulate the system as and when I'm there, to my own advantage, and move in one or the other, lose the whole direction in terms of what must actually happen.
You know why?
Because there's no planning.
Like I said, if you don't have a performance management contract that you sign with the supervisor to say this money is supposed to be used for ABC, and you have to be accountable for that. If you decide to manipulate that, yet you have that contract and you are being supervised, then it's going to show.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
You have to sit down and discuss that to say you didn't do what you're supposed to do.
You're actually spot on. In fact, you're almost using your knowledge of strategic management from there. And that's exactly what he's also exploring in terms of the bigger area. If you listen to the topic, you can be classified as strategic management. That's your area, for sure. But as much as we know, and that's what she has been questioning to then say, so where does it start? So if we're down here as a department, who drives strategy? Where does it come from? And our actions, who guides them? In other words, that's why you would find in terms of strategic management, you would always take the core. Possibly you guys go for an outing in January and say, 2019 strategy is this. So this is our strategic purpose and intentions and all of it. And then you go back, different guys who have been part of that, you go and cascade it to the various departmental members to then say, this is the strategy. Now you go to implement it. Because your question was, at implementation, it's either money is not used or it's used for different purposes. But did they get that top part? Which is fair enough, and that was the discussion, and I liked it. But I also listened to you, you quite clear in terms of your problem. But your research now cannot be overall strategic management, because then possibly people will say, okay, we know about strategy, but what is the problem? And that's why I'm showing this slide here, to then say when you come up with your objectives, and we normally show this in our first, when we do the first session of research, to then say, these are the characteristics of research, and you'll find your objectives and questions are all in here. Research originates with a question and a problem. That's a must. Question, problem. Problem, question. All right? So the research goal must then be clearly articulated. So you're actually describing your goal, which is kind of a purpose. All right? Then it follows a specific format, like I had to go through in our earlier session. And usually research usually divides the principal problem into more manageable problem. And this is where it's very important. You got a problem, but that problem can then be put into problems. And so these come through questions. So you're dividing that research problem into various questions, splitting it because you're going to explore it. And so research is guided by a specific research problem, which is where your objectives will come through. So we want to hear more of your objectives, focusing on the problem, question, hypothesis. You guys did about the hypothesis, right? You know what a hypothesis is. So we've got a theory. A theory is something that's been proven. So you can then say, I want to explore on this, but I suspect what causes it. So before it's proven, it's called a hypothesis. When proven, it becomes a theory. All right, and normally this happens at PhD level. All right, and then research accepts certain critical assumptions and limitations. We went through that. And then research requires the collection and interpretation of data. And research is cyclical. And this cyclical part is what we're dealing with. You're now dealing with chapter 5, where you're presenting your findings and analysis. But your findings and analysis, you also bring in what you spoke about in chapter 1. So that cycle, it comes from the word cycle. Cycle, you go back to chapter 2, chapter 1, you come back to chapter 5, go to chapter 1, fish out something, come to chapter 5, and then that's where your cyclical part comes in. But yeah, very important, and thanks for that discussion. At least it brought us to then fleshing some of these things out. All right, maybe let me go back to my slides. Here. Okay, so yeah, I think let's move on for the sake of time. So who's next? All right.
I'm saying, let me go first because I want to go out.
Oh, okay. All right.
My topic is the effectiveness of the wellness program.
Okay.
Provincial children. So my objective, the first one is to establish the different wellness issues that exist in the department, the implementation of the wellness program, and also to assess the perception of the employees with regards to the program.
All right. So maybe before I make a comment, any comments from your side? What do you think?
I think I missed the chapter.
Is it? Go over those three again.
Establish the different wellness issues that exist in the department.
Okay.
And the implementation, to examine the implementation of the wellness program. And to assess the perception with regards to of the employees with regards to the wellness program.
All right. So those are the three. Now comments. You wanted to hear? Which one? Again. It's not clear. You can hear my voice, right? Can I read it out? All right.
That's the first one.
Which one is? So which one is first?
Establish the different wellness.
All right. So the first one is to establish the different wellness issues that exist in the department. Is that the first one? To establish the different wellness issues that exist in the department. And then the second one, to examine the implementation of the wellness program. That's the second one, to examine the implementation of the wellness program. And then the third one is to assess the perception of employees with regards to the wellness program. That's the third one. Establish, the topic is, what is the topic, by the way?
To assess the effectiveness of the wellness program.
To,
The content treasure.
yes, to assess the effectiveness of the wellness program in the department. Right, so what do you say there? Yeah? You know what I think? I think you've got the wellness program. Talking from outside. You want to study the wellness program in the department, and then its effectiveness and all of that. But I'm not so sure if we're very clear in terms of what the problem is exactly about the wellness program. What is the problem there? Because then you want to focus on that problem. You do have the wellness program. You want to focus on it and all of it, explore more about it, the issues around it. But what is the problem? Is it that you've got... Yeah.
It's there for compliance because policy dictates, or it is there because maybe as and when you look at its implementation,
Yeah.
I think it should be coming in terms of the implementation. It might not be reaching the intended goals. Like for instance, if I'm at work depressed, at the end of the day, there are no programs that comes in to assist me to be able to be productive at the end of the day. Or maybe, because sometimes you give a person a responsibility, not looking as to whether this person does the relevant skills. Maybe it is not effective because you gave me for the sake of maybe there is a post that I must get at the end of the evening.
Yeah.
And at the end, I'm actually not doing what I'm supposed to do as per what the legislation expects me in terms of wellness.
Right, absolutely. So, and absolutely right. And if I'm coming in from as an external, I do not know about the wellness program and the dictates of the department in terms of its mandates, why it was implemented. I would say maybe in terms of the problem, is it because employees are, so many of them are fainting at work, or which affects performance ultimately, and what's happening there, which should come in a major way, and then we call it a problem. What exactly is happening which requires this wellness program?
And how does it benefit employees?
Then how does it benefit for sure? Maybe that's when she would then explore its benefits. But truly the problem, that problem part of it, yes.
Are we talking about objectives or going deeper into the upping? Everything that they're mentioning
Yeah,
is when you unpack.
when you unpack it. But what is the problem?
Objective is to ascertain the effectiveness. It is there, you're right. But is it effective?
And why do you want to find out of its effectiveness? What has happened?
From a management point of view, I work there, so I know there's a problem.
Okay, tell us. If you say, tell us now from outside.
From just a simple thing as we get employees that will exhaust leave. So, and then they go into the one that you apply for. Yeah. Then you get into the next one where you need to complete some forms, and then the HOD has to approve that kind of leave. So there isn't. That's where wellness should come in to ascertain as to what's going on here.
Right. So
Those kind of things don't happen.
now, if I have to box you in there, right there. Now, I think you're close to the problem where we look what employees, they exhaust their leave, and then they go for this other kind of leave. So you've got your normal annual leave, you exhaust it. Maybe you go into sick leave.
No, you exhaust sick leave.
You exhaust sick leave.
Wellness talks to sick leave.
Right. You exhaust your sick leave, and then you need some extra kind of leave, possibly at the expense of the department.
No, not definitely.
Now, when you take those days, what's happening to you? What's happening to you which requires you to take the leave? That's the problem. Taking leave. So now we want you to, when you go away, I know you want to go away very soon.
I'm not going on. I want to go to
Ah, okay. All right. But we want to know exactly, because research is about giving someone, possibly like me, who's got no idea what happens in the department. So you have to be specific about the problem, what is happening. So specify the problem, which requires us to then explore all of these. So for sure, if employees are exhausting their leave days, there's a problem there. Why is that? Are they getting sick? What's happening? Is it a mental state? Is it something emotional? And all of it. So let's be specific on the problem, and then you can always then explore it. But totally agreed in terms of your analysis, you know.
So looking at the absenteeism as a driver for a problem is that the company is losing the resource time as a problem statement.
And those are the effects, actually, because then the company losing the resources, and through they have to hire someone, so you're on leave. So
It's part of my, that I'm exploring, the absenteeism as well.
yeah, so he's talking to the effects of it. Then we're talking about the cause. Remember the cause and the effect. So the effect for sure, company losing resources, having to hire more, paying twice. Someone who's on leave and this other one, that's the effect, but also deal with the cause side of things. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I've been pressing a lot here. Yours lastly, and it's
So my title topic is demotivation of millennials in the workforce and workplace, a case of the organization that I work for.
yeah.
So the first objective is to investigate if monetary or non-monetary rewards motivate millennials. The second one is to identify the best communication methods between two different generations in the workplace. Third one is to explore the impact of management styles in the workplace on motivation of millennials.
All right. Motivation, millennials. What do you think?
What's the topic again?
She was driving at 160.
Oh, okay.
So my topic is demotivation of millennials in the workplace.
Uh-huh.
Millennials.
Oh.
Yeah, so they're
Are they demotivated or what?
yes,
Oh,
in the workplace. Or in my organization, like literally.
actually, we did a engagement specifically, yeah.
Oh, so, okay.
On that. All right. So then
So
go.
the objectives, right? The first one is to investigate if monetary or non-monetary rewards motivate millennial employees. The second one is to determine the best communication methods between different generations in the workplace. The third one is to explore the impact of management styles in the workplace.
All right. So what is the problem there? Why are you focusing on millennials? And who are millennials, by the way?
Those born after 1990.
Those born after 1990.
Yeah.
All right. So the ones born before 1990, why are you leaving them out? Let's call them dinosaurs. All right.
So they're baby boomers.
Okay. I know generation X and generation Y and all of it.
Particularly in our organization,
All right.
top level leadership is baby boomers, right?
Yeah.
Our organization has the downfall of literally leadership only leave when they're 65. So you can imagine, most of them are ranging between like 55. So we still have 10 years before that top level leaves. But a lot of the bottom level is millennials, so people that are 19 years old to about 35, who are the actual driving force of the organization. So that's why I chose to name that as that.
All right. If I have to ask this question in a different way, are you then saying these older guys, which I prefer to call the dinosaurs, are they not important to get some attention in terms of their own pay, salaries? What also motivates them? They're still in the system, and so what motivates them? They're still contributing to organizational performance.
Fair, but like I'm saying, they sit at the top, so they're not doing, if you want to call it the manual work, they sit and they give us what the strategy is, what's the vision for the next year. They sit in fancy offices with air conditioning, while the rest of that actually produce, like I'm saying, because we're in manufacturing, are the ones that we want. I want to protect.
Remember, you're talking motivation.
Yes.
And everyone wants to be motivated. Top, bottom, you still want to be, you have to be motivated. So you have to give us a reason why you particularly want to look at the motivation of these guys.
I also wanted to follow my study down. I didn't want to do it.
I had some, and then, you know, the 2 weeks I'm talking about, so I was having some PhD, and that topic, there was someone who was intending to do a PhD research on that. And then they were doing some, you know, proposal presentation. And then that same question came through. What is the problem there? So you cannot just say it's a demand on a company to say they have to get this kind of money. Because then the dinosaurs also want it, Generation X, Y, and all of them. So you have to come up with a specific reason why you're focusing on them, such as...
Millennials are now more than 50% of the workforce. They're the ones that are taking over. As the baby boomers are now going out. In essence, the way it should be. Right?
So they're the most in the companies.
Yes. Now they're actually taking over.
All right.
Yes.
You wanted to say something?
I'm trying to look at it from your perspective.
Yeah.
To say we are actually the dinosaurs, as you put it,
Yeah.
are at the strategic level
Yes.
and experience attached. My thinking is she's actually coming in from the side which says, how do we infuse into the strategic level these millennials, so that as and when they are in there, the other ones will then be motivated to say, because so and so is at our level, it's also within the strategic point in terms of the company. Then we'll need to go an extra mile. Maybe we can also be the ones getting in there. But like you say, when you talk of demotivation of millennials, could it be that they are actually sidelined, they are left out to a level that their say is not actually considered? And because it is not considered, then they feel they don't have a say or an input that they must make in the company?
Yeah.
Or is it because they are only demotivated because they can't be promoted into the strategic management?
So you actually covered a couple of things, and those could then be part of the problem in terms of what he's describing. So when you then describe your problem, you will need to pick on some of those to say this is the problem. Maybe they are being left out, so that's the problem. Or maybe they are mobile. Take, for instance, they are resigning, they're not staying long, and yet we want to infuse them into the company. They're going to be taking over to the Generation X and Y and dinosaurs, and so we need them. So how do we then motivate them based on those guys who are going to be retiring and they have to leave, and so we lose knowledge along the way. That way, you then have specified your problem, but again, you know, you...
How management can infuse them into their leadership, so that they feel they should be allowed to give ideas, not only from the top. They should be the driver. Yeah. Be the driver.
In the past, politically, we would say building the second layer of leadership.
Yeah.
I think that's what she's actually talking about.
True.
To say, I will building the second layer of leadership. And the only way of doing that is when you give somebody a space to be able to play around the transfer of skills, as you already said.
Overshadow.
And obviously, if the intention is to see this company moving forward,
Yes.
there has to be that creation, that commotion in terms of the leakage, in terms of transfer of skills to the young ones, and also considering the fact that these people that we think they are young, they are coming from school.
Yes.
They've got the knowledge in terms of the current situation. Therefore, that knowledge must also be infused into the system. It's more of acceptance at that level.
Give them the work, overshadow, just lead and guide. That's what we have also at work right now.
Yeah.
There are many, and we are looking towards in 10, 15 years we'll be retiring and social. So we try to lead them to drive. We say, come up with ideas. What do you see? What is lacking? They put everything there. We see whether it's possible we can do that. We have a budget to implement. Because we know at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who will be driving the organization. And there's no way that will be still there. The time will come. And this is the fourth generation of let's drive.
All right.
Also, I
Yeah.
Also, I think
Yes.
the challenge that comes.
Mm.
I was a school principal at some point.
Yeah.
I had this person who was my second in charge. I sat down with him, that was the beginning of the year, to say, I want to give you space this year. You are actually running this school. I will actually be on the sidelines. Anything that comes, you will handle. It is only when you fail to resolve that will come to me. And this person will go out and say, we are doing the job of this person. It actually comes at end. You see, that's why I'm saying it is a dicey situation. That people will think now these old ones, there is also that intention of saying they don't know anything except ourselves. And with that pride, also you have that challenge. Hence I'm saying there should be acceptance also on the part of the millennials to say we are not here to change the status quo overnight. We are here to be part of the status quo. And also, in one way or the other, influence also police. Because like you're saying, it is more of, it's either them calling for the structural changes within the institution. Changes in the sense that you create other positions of management to accommodate these young ones. In the process, you are actually transferring skills to them.
So essentially, what he's talking about now is when you explore the issue more, because then these are some of the pitfalls or slippery places as you go along to then say someone, whilst they're overshadowing, like you're saying, and possibly as a way of motivation, and then they would start saying, we're doing all the work, and those guys know nothing, But that's more of your exploration, so you'd have to explore more in terms of all of those angles. But in terms of our academic discourse, and thank you very much for those contributions, you wanted to add some more? Yeah.
In that kind of situation, it may be, some of the things that you can also put, I don't know where you put it, for them to be able to be infused into the system, do you have a succession planning and talent management? That would help, because you are able to look at the talent of the people that you have, develop that, look at the fact that each and every year that people are retiring, you groom them for those positions. Every year you put that, whoever who is groomed through that position, then you'll be able to adapt those young kids very easily.
And again, that's part of your main report as you go along. But need I say more in terms of the problem, the objectives, and then analyzing your results, as in presentation of your results and analysis? That is very important. It's the core. It's now you guys doing your masters, very important piece of work. And like I'm saying, even when you go to your PhD level, that becomes even so much of a demand. Your problem must be a real problem and very much specific and explicit. Say it explicitly and then draw questions, and then what you then intend to find out should then be weighty. And that's how we get to this chapter 5. So like we're saying, chapter 5, presentation of your results. Yes, sir?
All of us raised our topics.
Yeah.
And as and when we structured them, we thought they are... So how do I know that this is indeed a real topic in terms of the topic?
Now, so why, and that's why I had to take some time to give you a chance, each and every one, to present. But then we don't have enough time for it. Between you and your supervisor, and I see you, all of you have got supervisors except one maybe. Between you and your supervisor, when you discuss it, they should be able to then tell that, okay, this is a weighty problem, or do you need to make adjustments in some places somewhere? And I thought, and that's the ear I was trying to develop in you as well. You listen to somebody else's research. If you know how to specify and make your problem statement, and then draw questions and objectives from it, that pattern, and ask those questions, what is the problem? Why is it a problem? When did it become a problem? And how is it a problem? You know, those kind of questions. They will then lead you to a weighty problem. We can do it now, and like we've been trying to do right now, as you presented, but maybe not enough, or in a major sense as you go forward. But you should engage in this kind of discussion with your supervisor. Your supervisor, they should be able to then guide you in terms of that area. But it is important. I'm not so sure if you guys do a presentation in terms of your proposals to a panel. Do you? You don't? PhD you have to, but I can assure you where they will get you. So when you go through everything, if you go through your dissertation, well and good. It's going to go to an examiner. So you have an internal examiner or moderator or an external one. Now it won't pass there. So whether you and your supervisor have agreed, and if it does not comply with some of these requirements, as an external examiner, I'll say, it's got these shortfalls, so I'm not passing it and you're not graduating. It always happens, all the time. I go through, I'm involved with some of these institutions. I'm also an external examiner. I'll say I don't pass it, and it takes one examiner to stop the whole process. So take for instance, I come from the Pretoria side. I've got major dealings with the University of Pretoria, all right? And so they would always say they've got 3 external examiners, the final document. Out of the 3, all of them have to say they pass it. If one says they don't because they've got a concern, if graduation is in April, then you're not going to graduate. You have to fix those ones and send it to that examiner who said you cannot be passed. Only then can you go through.
But then as and when the examiner does that, does the examiner give inputs in terms of the areas that are challenging?
Exactly. So they'll write a report actually, and that report is specific, and as researchers, we understand it. So they would raise concerns around the major areas of research and research practice. To say that is not specific, address that. And so when you actually do address, you'd have to produce some kind of a form where you're saying that issue number 1, which was raised, I addressed it in such a way, issue number 2, issue number 3, and normally as an external examiner, I would expect to see all of those, and I'll see how you've addressed it, and then I would then say, adequately addressed or not really, and normally you'd have to go through that with your supervisor as well. Yeah, it's important. But, different institutions, I'm just giving you an extreme case here, different institutions, different practice. But it is important that, the problem is well formulated, your purpose of research is well formulated, and then only then can you say your research is substantive. All right. So yeah, I hope you at least have developed that ear. I was, that skill of trying to pick on. That's good. And then the final section, really, which is your chapter 6, you're now concluding. So the purpose of this section is to round up everything. You've presented your findings, you have analyzed them, you have shown the purpose of your research as well. Here, you want to conclude and then recommend. It makes no purpose. All right, so this section also very important, and particularly for any problem, if you give to the person who's responsible for a department or a section, they would be very much interested in this section, because then that's where their solutions are in terms of your findings and your recommendations. So you're rounding off everything, and that's your last chapter, which is chapter 6. And as always, in terms of structure, you're actually going to follow through that structure introduction. So have a summary of your objectives again. You see that the cyclical, you go back to chapter 1. Those objectives, they come up again. Now imagine your objectives haven't been straight or haven't been well formulated. Again, you're going to have problems all the way through the whole research document. So again, summarize your objectives. What did you set out to achieve? That's your objectives. And then summarize your findings, and that's coming from the previous chapter, all right, which is chapter 5. Summarize the major ones, and it could come in a form of a paragraph or so. And then summarize your conclusions from your findings. You conclude, this is what I found out. So your conclusion is, this is the status or the status quo in terms of this problem. And then what are your recommendations? You have to recommend solutions to the problems. Maybe it's best practice, all right? Maybe, what should be done to solve the problem in terms of your problems. And these recommendations come into two formats, actually. So there's recommendations for best practice so as to solve the problem. And then there's the second part where we talk about recommendations about future research. You might find that there's an area where you think it's not really part of the scope of your research, but you're recommending someone else who would read your report to say, maybe they can then explore more into that area. Makes a lot of sense. It would make a lot of sense. So if I have to go back to mine, my topic which I gave you earlier on, so I wanted to explore the role of knowledge management and innovation in companies. So I want to look at knowledge management and its contribution to that. So I went through it. And then maybe part of my findings were that, and I'm looking at South Africa, technology companies. And so I find out, okay, the more companies practice knowledge management practices, it does contribute to their innovation level. So we have new products coming in. Fair enough, it's part of my conclusions. So I talk about best practices of knowledge management. But then in South Africa, I'm giving you as an example, we have laws about triple BE, yeah? You know those? In companies. Now, those laws talk about who should be appointed. All right? Who should be appointed? So whatever knowledge you have might not really matter, but at this stage we want to fix the demographics. So who's appointed at what level? So we do not know how it then goes on when it comes to knowledge management. And really for my research, I would say it's not part of what I'm recommending. But I might then recommend and say, maybe for future references, somebody might take it off and say they want to explore companies that are triple BEE compliant and they are also level of innovation. That was not part of my scope. But I wanted to see those which are compliant in terms of triple BEE and their innovation for future research. And that's how it goes. So I'm giving you this as an example, but you might find in your own areas that there are certain places where you think for future research, you might need to look at it, but it wasn't part of the scope of my own research. And that's how it actually works. And then you conclude. And that is your chapter 6. Any questions there?
Clarify the dates on the system is 2nd of September for the Tanidin submission. And then from there, how do you go on the final? And then when you submit, then the supervisor, they start marking from there in September.
Are you going to submit something on the 6th of September?
Yeah, 2nd of September is the submission.
Of what?
2nd September.
Final dissertation. on the 2nd of September.
Yes.
Man, how many weeks is that from now? 2 weeks.
Yes.
And some of you are doing chapter 2. Are you going to be done by then?
Someone told me that it's the 9th of September.
That's the
Yeah, that is-
extension.
That days, 2 days, 9.
the 9th
That
of
one.
Turn it in by next week.
Sorry?
24th of August.
I was paying for the 9th of the late submission.
All right, but I can, look, that part you need to talk to Sandra. I flashed the email. She's responsible for that in terms of your deadlines and all of it. But I can assure you, now when you do your submission and you do turn it in, so they're looking for similarities, first of all, but I suppose the evaluation starts.
Okay, then you get feedback afterwards.
Then you get feedback. If it's your final one, I suppose that's the final feedback. It's either then you make it or you don't. I suppose you'd have been talking with your supervisor, and it's important to actually engage with your supervisor at this stage so that at least you get corrections.
And the editing part where we pay the external editors, that's happen after we get the marks. So
No, don't do it before.
Yeah, you do it before.
You do it before, then you turn it in.
It would have to be before then. Because when I'm doing the examination, take for instance your research.
It's not edited when they mark it.
Yeah,
always
Yeah,
before the
they'll
turning in,
mark
we
it
get
and
it.
say, yeah.
because when you give it to the examiner who looks at it, they can then raise that to say this needs editing because the spellings are wrong, the grammar is wrong and all of it. So you don't want that to come up at the last stage. But I think check with Sandra in terms of some of those processes. And I see you really have quite some tight schedule. It is quite some tight schedule. All right, I had some examples here, but I'm not so sure if we really have to go through that Chinese thing, how you then converge. But maybe how do you converge? Your findings and then converging with your conclusions and recommendations. You can always then look at it. So here we're talking about the SMEs in Gauteng and their performance. So in terms of your research findings, the following recommendations are made as best practice that might enhance these SMEs. And then you start, listing them. SMEs management teams should consider attending small business management programs. That means there's a knowledge gap here. Possibly it's part of the findings. So they have to attend so as to enhance their skills. And then they should also consider implementing this PM, performance management system, in their organization. Maybe that was found as a gap. They concluded that there's a gap, so they need to implement that system. They should also consider using a set of KPIs, key performance indicators, to monitor, manage, and improve organizational performance. Maybe it was found to be a gap. It's not there. So you recommend implement it because it's not there. All right? They should consider using, the mapping process and all of it. So you can use anyone, but stylistic note, maybe paragraphs better than bullets. All right? So you have a paragraph. So a paragraph dealing with that area, you describe it well. Another paragraph, but it's really up to you. Bullets also can work. It's so much about what you think is suitable for you. That Chinese one, all right? So, and this one is using paragraphs. So you describe what they found out, and then maybe you put some recommendation in terms of a paragraph. And then this one is about for further research, future research. This was not covered in his scope, but they're saying maybe someone else should look at some of these areas. Again, you can also have it as part of what you're recommending to happen. All right. More examples. But otherwise, I suppose you see it. So recommendations for best practice, recommendations for future research, very much so. And so much about my story. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Not a question, but appreciation.
All right.
I must say, if I had at the beginning, not here at Genesis, when I was doing my BA, if I had a simple and lecture like yourself, I think I would not have made research one of my enemies.
Okay.
Uh,
All right.
you came, when you started, I must be honest, I did not actually understand as to where you were taking us to. But in the process, I began to love what we were actually doing.
All right.
And if I had my powers over you, I'll actually be saying another session just as a revision, maybe more broader, because I don't see ourselves ending here. One day we want our names before them to have a DR before you call my name.
Okay.
I take it if it is done properly, it might be able to take us through. And yeah, like I said, mine is just appreciated. And I take it it's not only coming from myself, but I'm actually speaking on my own behalf now. But that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. I acknowledge that, and thank you very much. If at all, we add value, for us, purpose achieved. If there's been some value added, purpose achieved. And sure, from my side, the next wish is seeing you on your graduation. I suppose you'll see us along the congregants on there for your capping. But otherwise, good luck with your research, and thank you very much for that appreciation as well. All right, otherwise, keep well.
Apart from that which you presented to us today, are you in the position to also give us more information? Because I can see you've got a lot on your table.
For sure, because then, so this was just some revision for those 2 chapters. But there are moments when we do a whole lecture on research and business research. So I'll take you from the beginning right through to the end. But now that is a whole long lecture, which we should possibly take a couple of days to go through. And
What I'm actually requesting, in terms of documents that you have,
yeah.
whether presentations that you made at some point or whatever, which can also assist us as and when we move here. Apart from looking at the slides that you presented, we will also be able to refer to some of the things that we shall attach on our emails, as you said.
Ah, okay. Fair enough. So what I'm going to do before I leave today, on your email address is this one, and thank you, sir. I'm going to send you these slides, all of them, and then possibly sometime next week I'm going to look at some of my materials, and then I'm going to attach it again to your email addresses. Then you can always use it. All right, thank you very much, and enjoy what's left of your weekend.